In 2019, two men climbed into a steel sphere the size of a small car, sealed the hatch, and let themselves fall almost 7 miles into the dark. Not to Challenger Deep, the famous one, the record everyone fights over, to the other one. 200 kilometers east sits a second abyss almost no human has ever visited. Everyone assumed the bottom would be the same dead, starving silt as everywhere else that deep. It wasn't. There was mantle rock where mantle rock shouldn't be, pale threads in the mud, and something already down there that we put there. When people talk about the deepest place on Earth, they mean one spot, Challenger Deep. The bottom of the Mariana Trench, almost 11 kilometers down, the name in every record book and every documentary. And because everyone points at the same single point, almost no one notices that the trench has more than one floor. 200 kilometers to the east of Challenger Deep, and about 145 kilometers south of the island of Guam, the seabed drops away again into a separate pit. Its measured depth is 10,714 meters, give or take about 10. That is the second deepest point in the entire Mariana Trench, and one of the deepest places anywhere on the planet. And yet it sits in the shadow of its more famous neighbor, barely visited, barely named, barely thought about at all. Try to feel how far down that really is. If you could pick up Mount Everest, the whole mountain, and lower it into this hole, the summit, the place climbers die trying to reach, would still be more than a kilometer underwater. Nearly a mile of ocean would close over the top of the tallest thing on land. And the water above you at that depth doesn't just sit there, it presses. The weight of 11 kilometers of ocean bearing down works out to more than 1,000 times the pressure you feel standing in a room right now. Something like 8 tons pushing on every single square inch of you? Imagine a couple of full-grown elephants balanced on a coin, and that coin resting on every part of your skin at once. Sunlight has never reached this place. Not once, in the entire history of the world. It is permanently, absolutely black, a few degrees above freezing, and heavier than almost anywhere a human being has ever gone. And for most of history, nobody even had a name for it. That part is stranger than it sounds. This second abyss was only found in 1997, when a mapping team out of Hawaii was dragging sonar across the trench and the seafloor suddenly fell away beneath their instruments. They called it, unromantically, the HMRG Deep, after their own research group. It kept that flat, forgettable label for over a decade. Then, in 2009, someone had a better idea and held a naming competition for schoolchildren across Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands, the people who actually live closest to this trench. The winning entry came from teenagers, and the name they chose was Sirena. It comes from an old Chamorro folktale about a girl who loved the sea so much and disobeyed her mother so completely that she was transformed. Half of her turned into a fish, and she slipped into the water and never came back. A child pulled down into the deep, forever. They gave that name to a hole in the ocean that swallows light. And still, even with a name, it stayed the runner-up. Everyone kept diving the famous one. Which is exactly why what was waiting in Sirena Deep went unseen for so long. Until a man decided the runner-up was the whole point. His name is Victor Vescovo. On paper, he does not look like an ocean explorer. He made his money in private equity in Texas. He served as an intelligence officer in the United States Navy Reserve. And in his spare time, he had already completed what mountaineers call the Explorer's Grand Slam, climbing the highest peak on every continent, Everest included, and skiing to both the North and South Poles. He had stood at the top and the ends of the world. What was left was down. So he poured a fortune into building a submarine that could reach the deepest point of all 5 oceans, one after another. And then he climbed inside and piloted it himself. And here's the part that tells you this wasn't just a rich man collecting trophies. Riding down with him into Sirena Deep was a scientist named Alan Jamieson, a Hadal ecologist who has almost certainly laid eyes on more of the deepest zone of the ocean than any human being alive. He is the kind of person who has spent a career dropping cameras into trenches most people don't know exist, and who helped describe the deepest fish ever filmed. If anyone on Earth knew what the bottom of the Mariana Trench was supposed to look like, it was the man sitting in the sphere next to Vescovo. Vescovo wanted the record. Jamieson wanted the answer to a much older question. What, if anything, actually lives down there in the dark? The machine that carried them is called the limiting factor. It was not like the one-shot bathyscapes of the past, the vessels that made a single historic plunge and were basically done. This one was built to go all the way to the bottom of the ocean, over and over again, and come back up intact, ready to dive the next morning. At its heart is a sphere of titanium thick enough to hold off that crushing weight, just big enough for 2 people to sit knee to knee in the cold. Everything else, the lights, the thrusters, the robotic arm, the sample baskets, hangs off that sphere like equipment bolted to a diving bell. It was, at the time, arguably the only crewed vehicle on Earth that could drop into a place like Sirena Deep on demand, land softly on the floor, work for hours, and lift off again. Which meant that for the first time, the trench's forgotten second pit could actually be explored by human eyes, not just sampled blindly from the surface. On the 7th of May, 2019, that is exactly what happened. The limiting factor detached from its ship, flooded its tanks, and began the long, slow fall. It takes hours to sink that far. The sub drops through the water column at roughly the speed of an elevator, past the last blue light, past the depth where the last fish give up, down into a blackness that has no bottom you can see until it's suddenly right in front of you. There is no rescue at that depth. If something failed, a seal, a thruster, the power, there is no other vehicle on the planet that could come down and pull them out in time. The pressure that fills every documentary about this place is not a number on a page when you are the thing it is pressing on. One crack in that titanium and it would not be a slow leak. It would be over before the sound reached you. And then the two men were sitting on the floor of Sirena Deep, the first human beings ever to reach it. Not passing through. Parked. They spent something like 176 minutes down there, nearly 3 hours on the deepest, untouched floor of the Mariana Trench, alone in a way that is almost impossible to describe. There were more people orbiting the planet in space that afternoon than there were human beings at the bottom of the sea. And then they started picking things up. The first thing they brought back should not have been there. Reaching out with the sub's robotic arm, they collected a piece of rock from the trench's western slope, and when it came up and was examined, it turned out to be mantle rock. Not ordinary seafloor. This was material from the mantle, the deep, hot layer of the planet that normally sits kilometers below the crust, sealed away where no one can touch it. Here it had been dragged up and exposed on the wall of the trench, and hauled to the surface by two men in a titanium ball. It was described as the deepest piece of mantle rock ever recovered directly from the seabed. Sit with that for a second. To hold a piece of the mantle in your hands, you normally have to wait for a volcano to spit it out, or drill for years. At Sirena Deep, the planet's own machinery had quietly pushed a piece of its interior up onto a ledge in the dark, and left it lying there like it was nothing. The trench wasn't just a hole. It was a wound, opened deep enough to show the layer underneath. And that is what a trench like this actually is. Not a valley worn into the seabed by water, but a seam where one great slab of the planet is bending down and sliding beneath another, dragging pieces of the deep interior up into the light of a submarine's lamps. Sirena Deep is a place where you can reach out and touch the inside of the Earth. One thing I'm honestly curious about while we're down here. If someone offered you a seat in that sphere, nearly 7 miles of black water above you, 3 hours on a floor no one has ever stood on, would you actually climb in and go? Or is that a door you'd need to leave closed? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely don't know what I'd do. Because that rock was not just a geology trophy. It was a clue. When mantle rock like that meets seawater, it undergoes a slow chemical reaction called serpentinization. The rock literally drinks the water into its crystal structure and, in the process, gives off gases, hydrogen, methane. It turns the surrounding fluid strange and caustic, pushing it toward the alkalinity of something like ammonia or bleach. And here is why that matters at the bottom of the world. Those gases are food. Not for anything with eyes or a mouth. For microbes, tiny, chemical-eating life that doesn't need sunlight at all, that can build itself out of the energy locked in rock reacting with water. We already know this isn't a fantasy, because in the same broad region of the Mariana seafloor, at shallower depth, scientists found an entire community living on exactly this chemistry. Clams, packed together in the mud around cold serpentine seeps, feeding through microbes on gas leaking out of the rock. No sun, no sinking food from above. Just stone and water and the chemistry between them, keeping a whole colony alive in permanent night. Think about how completely that breaks the rule we all learned as children, that everything, in the end, eats the sun. Plants catch sunlight, animals eat plants, and the whole living world runs on that one star. Down here, on that ledge in the dark, there is an entire food web that has never used a single photon. It runs on the planet itself. If life can do that there, the obvious question was whether it could do it deeper, in the deepest place of all. And here's what makes that question so heavy. Sirena Deep is below a hard biological wall. There is a depth beyond which fish simply cannot exist. Not because it's too cold or too dark, but because of the chemistry of their own bodies. To survive the pressure, deep-sea fish pack their cells with a stabilizing molecule, and at somewhere around 8,200 meters, they hit the limit. Any deeper, and the very trick keeping them alive stops working. The deepest fish ever filmed anywhere on Earth was recorded at about 8,300 meters. Sirena Deep is more than 2 kilometers below that line, so think about what that means. When those landers filmed pale threads on the rock at over 10,600 meters, they were filming life in a place where a fish, one of the toughest, most adaptable animals we know, would die just from being there. Whatever is making those mats, if it's alive, is playing by rules that most of the animal kingdom can't follow. Before we go any further down that path, one quick thing. Because what came back next is the part I actually made this whole video to get to, and it's easy to miss. If you want more of the deep ocean explained like this, subscribing is genuinely how you catch these the moment they go up, and there is a lot more of this trench still to cover. Now, in 2020, another expedition sent instruments down into Sirena Deep, landers, dropped from the surface to sit on the floor and film. And at roughly 10,677 meters, in a place where the textbooks say there should be almost nothing, the cameras caught structures. Pale, filament-like threads and mats on the rock and sediment, the kind of shapes that, everywhere else we've seen them, are built by colonies of bacteria. Not fish, not worms, not anything you'd expect. Just faint white strands in the deepest black, exactly where the serpentine chemistry should be leaking its gas. The scientists were careful with their words. They called them possible chemosynthetic microbial communities, life that might be running, at the very bottom of the ocean, on nothing but rock and water. And here's the part that unsettles me. If that's what those threads are, it means the deepest, most hostile place in the Mariana Trench isn't dead at all. It's quietly, invisibly alive, powered by the planet itself. And it's not only microbes. Sirena Deep, for all its darkness, is not empty. The instruments and the earlier surveys turned up giant single-celled organisms called xenophyophores, and that phrase deserves a second. Most single cells are invisible. You need a microscope to see one at all. These have grown to the size of your open hand, a single unit of life you could pick up in your palm, sprawled across the mud like a delicate crumpled ball. Nothing about that should be possible at this pressure, and yet there they are, scattered across the floor of the trench's second abyss in the dark. There are amphipods, pale shrimp-like scavengers that swarm anything that falls, thriving at a depth that should flatten them, and the way they pull it off is almost unbelievable. To keep their shells from dissolving under that pressure and chemistry, one of these creatures pulls aluminum out of the sediment and coats itself in a homemade metallic gel, a kind of armor it builds from the mud around it. Others survive by eating sunken wood and plant scraps that drift all the way down from the world of the living, digesting the one thing nothing else will touch. Sea cucumbers, worms, a whole faint ecosystem, getting by in the cold and the crushing weight, each of them solving the impossible in its own strange way. Which makes the next discovery so much worse. Because when researchers hauled those amphipods up from the Hadal Mariana and looked inside their tiny bodies, they found something that didn't belong. Plastic. Synthetic fibers and fragments, lodged in the guts of creatures living miles below the reach of any sunlight, and not in one unlucky specimen. In study after study, the majority of the animals were contaminated. In some of the sampling, roughly 72 out of every 100 amphipods had our garbage inside them. Think about what that means. These animals have never seen the sun, never seen the surface, never seen a human being. Most of us will never get within 7 miles of where they live. And we still got there first, not with a submarine, but with our trash. The single most remote, least visited abyss on the planet, and it is already full of us. That is the thing I can't get out of my head. We reached the bottom of the second deepest place on Earth, and something we threw away was waiting when we arrived. So you'd think, with human eyes finally on the floor and instruments filming the mats, the story would be settled. It isn't, and that argument is still very much out there. Because seeing pale threads on a camera is not the same as proving they're alive. To this day, no one has brought those structures up, cultured them, put them under a microscope, and confirmed, beyond doubt, that the deepest point of the Mariana Trench is home to a living community feeding on rock chemistry. Some of what the cameras saw could be mineral, not microbial. Strange deposits laid down by the same reactions, mimicking the look of life without being it. The people who found them said so themselves, carefully, honestly. And that uncertainty is the whole reason Sirena Deep matters more than the record everyone chased. Challenger Deep won the trophy for being a few hundred meters deeper, but it was the runner-up, the second abyss, the one with the Mantle rock exposed on its wall and the serpentine chemistry leaking gas into the dark, that turned out to be sitting on the real question. Not how deep can we go, but can life exist on the raw chemistry of a planet, with no star to feed it at all? And we have flown by, dropped in, filmed it, and still cannot say for certain what we're looking at. That question doesn't stay at the bottom of the ocean. It's the same reasoning that has scientists staring at other worlds, at the ice-covered oceans of Europa and Enceladus, moons where the same rock meets water chemistry may be grinding away in the dark, right now, without a sun. If life can hold on at the bottom of Sirena Deep, on nothing but stone and seawater, then the universe just got a great deal more crowded. Everyone kept fighting over the deepest point on Earth. The stranger answer was hiding 200 kilometers away, in the abyss nobody bothered to name for 12 years. It has no confirmation, no proper study of what lives there, not even a certain answer to whether those pale threads are alive. There is a whole second world down there in the dark that we have barely started to look at. And some of what's been pulled from the deep since is even harder to explain than a plastic bag at the bottom of the sea. I'll see you on the next one.